Hi everybody. This is a supplemental video to the 2014 Spooky Lab video that I did. And the purpose of this video is to just show you how some of the props were made and how they work, and hopefully to give you some ideas of your own. There is really no structure to this video. I'm just going to randomly look at things and talk about them a little bit. I hope you enjoy this. The first thing that I would like to talk about is this tube, because it's very simple to make, and it has exceeded all of my expectations of creepiness. For the actual presentation, I had illuminated it from the underside, and I'll talk about that more later. This is just a piece of old rubber roofing. But the fluid inside is actually just dish detergent. The creatures inside are just rubber fishing lures, which are presumably oil-based or something, because the dish detergent has attacked them. And what you're looking at here is about 4 days of decomposition. So for best effect, you want to mix them into the detergent about 24 hours before Halloween. And around that time, it'll have just this perfect amount of cloudiness that you just can't make out what it is, but I got a lot of oohs and grosses from people on this one. Now, I'm sure you can find these little rubber crayfish somewhere at a sporting goods store or something. This is odd. This is the prototype. After several days, it shrunk. But here's the interesting part. It seems that these little crayfish have the same density as the dish detergent. So they don't really float, and they don't really sink. They just kind of stay wherever you position them. And so, as I've said, after about 24 hours of decomposition, this is just a spectacular prop. I highly recommend this. The rubber gasket thing is really serving two purposes. First of all, it's lit from underneath, so it blocks any stray light that's distracting. And secondly, it kind of acts like a suction cup and helps it from tipping over. One more point that I think is relevant. It's very difficult to get all the air out of this. So when you're putting the rubber stopper on, I found the best way to do it is insert a piece of 24 gauge copper wire and press the rubber stopper in, and then pull the copper out, and this will make the process of getting air bubbles out much simpler. Just as a random point of curiosity, this is that orange highlighter solution that I was talking about in the first video. And again, with a super easy to make prop. This guy just requires a little bit of illumination on his backside, and he has eyes made out of marbles, and that really lights them up. And he is just simply a mask, and I use some silicone to attach marbles for eyes, and a balloon that presses his face up against the sidewall. The jar is just an old pickle jar or something that I cut on the wet saw. The lid is just a plywood circle. And here's the good doctor's face turned inside out, which illustrates one of the wonderful things about Halloween. There are no right or wrong answers, and that makes it a lot of fun. I have a habit of dissecting my old appliances for salvageable parts, and this project was no exception because of its bizarre nature. So this tube is out of an old toaster oven, and it's the high temperature glass that houses the resistance coil that gets hot inside of the toaster oven. The frame is acrylic glass, and these are just LEDs. I used LEDs extensively on this project this time, so I was forced to build a lot of these battery cages. But take a look at it in the dark. I was pleased with its appearance, but I think, like many of the details, it was just lost. I think you're in a case of sensory overload where you can't take in everything you're seeing, so a lot of the details just become white background noise. But I think it's pretty. And this was the second place that I was required to solder. If you've never soldered before, then now's a good time to start. You've been putting it off long enough. And I have a trick that can probably help you out. If you already know how to solder, then you're lucky. Now all of these little lights are just LEDs. Oh, you can't really see that. All of these little lights are just LEDs that are running off of a couple AA batteries. LEDs are pretty easy to use, but as with everything, there is a complication. The positive lead on an LED should have one of these things soldered to it. It's called a resistor, and the little bands of colors are a code that indicate what the resistor does. But honestly, I'm always in such a hurry that I just use trial and error until I find one that works. If it's important, then you can apply the mathematics to determine the right resistor. If every time you've ever tried to solder you look like a fumbling moron, then I recommend that you make one of these. Having your work being held steadily vastly improves your soldering performance, and this is so simple to make. A few of the objects on this table were eliminated from the underside, and to do that I just made this simple table and drilled some holes in it. The enclosure for the bulb is quite literally a can light. And the reason that you can get away with this without creating too much heat is because I'm using a 40 watt equivalent CFL. I was severely skeptical. I mean, I never thought these would be a suitable replacement for incandescent bulbs, but I have to admit they've proven themselves. And I have a decent amount of experience with them. What we're looking at here is the entire contraption that sat on top of those 3 tanks in the main experiment. And this thing, believe it or not, is made almost entirely out of spare parts. These bundles of wire are just hot glued to ceramic disc magnets. And they stick to the sides of the tanks because they're just oversized soup cans. And this is the third place I was required to solder. Now there's not much left on the inside of the original PlayStation, but I did keep the original Switch functional. Now, I don't remember what the problem was here or why this turned out to be such a disaster, but I guess the important part is that it works. These tanks use the same type of coffee can lighting, but the only difference is that in this case I'm using these lids to add just a little bit of color. The thing that the brain is sitting on is just an old insulator that I found in a field, probably from some old farmer's fence. And the brain, although it's not actually a human brain, and you can tell this because of the brain stem entering from the front instead of from underneath because, well, us primates walk upright. But this brain just came from a prop store, from like a Halloween store a long time ago. The way that I got it to look so creepy, as though it's kind of shedding skin, is by applying liquid rubber latex to it. And in this case, since people aren't used to seeing brains too often, you can take a little bit of artistic license here. Now, probably just as important as this purple coffee can lid is this yellow one. Now look what happens to the color of the top of the brain when you put this here. I guess it's all about the details. This one sat in the middle, and it's the only one that isn't real glass. This thin piece of clear plastic came from, well, an old junky picture frame. I think this one's a little more convincing in person, but it did all right. I had quite a few questions about whether or not this was real glass. And finally we come to what I think is the star of the show. Any last guesses about what they're made out of? You guessed it. Foam. You're probably already aware of the fact that foams like these come in varying densities, and a softer foam like this isn't as good for sculpting something like this alien as a harder, more dense foam like that. 90% of the work in order to make this is done on the bandsaw, so I might do like one of those high-speed Duresta style videos for it. I have been experimenting with coating the exterior of the foam with various things, but none of them have been very successful so far, with the singular exception of clear silicone. There does seem to be some merit to that idea. I don't know if you'll be able to pick it up on this footage, but it gives it almost a clear, sort of slimy reptilian quality that I really did like. But I've tried some other things, paints and latex, and they all just seem to be absorbed into the foam. But keep checking back and I'll tell you if I make any progress. Well, that's it for now, and I hope you were able to squeeze something interesting or useful out of all of this. And let me know in the comments if you think building one of these would be an interesting build video, because I don't think making these is as complicated as you may think. It's just a whole lot of bandsaw work and some fancy spray painting. And by the way, this scalpel is fake. See ya.